The classroom is empty now. Late afternoon light slants through dusty windows, catching the chalk dust, still floating in the air like something unwilling to settle. Mrs. Adaeze Okonkwo stands at the front of room 4, the same room she has stood in for 40 years, and looks at it the way you look at a face you are about to forget on purpose. The desks are the same desks, scarred, initialed, patched with tape gone yellow with age. The blackboard still carries the ghost of yesterday's lesson, long division, half erased, trailing off mid-sum. She runs her hand along the edge of her desk. 40 years of hands have worn a smooth groove into the wood, right where hers rests now. A groove she never noticed being made, only now notices is finished. "I want to tell you something before we begin," she says. "Something I only understood at the very end of my life's work, though I didn't call it that then. I called it Tuesday, I called it grading papers until midnight under a bulb that flickered. I called it room 4. She begins packing a box. Chalk stubs worn down to nubs. A cracked mug that says world's okayest teacher, a gag gift from some class, some year, she can no longer remember which, though she remembers laughing so hard she'd had to sit down. 40 years is a long time to give to other people's children, she goes on. Long enough that you stop counting the years and start counting the faces. Long enough that the faces start to blur together into one long, tender ache you carry without naming. And on the last day, the very last day, I stood in this room and asked myself a question I had never once let myself ask in all those years. She sits down heavily in her chair, the springs sighing beneath her the way they always have. The room, empty, seems to lean in and listen, the way a room does when it has held too many secrets to stay silent forever. What do I have to show for it? She looks down at her own hands, the hands that have held 100 pencils steady over 100 trembling fingers, and finds she does not yet have an answer. Before we continue, if stories like this one move you, stories about the quiet, unseen ways people build family, purpose, and legacy, stay with me. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Now, let's go back to where it began. She lifts a heavy stack of old grade books from the bottom drawer, the paper yellowed and soft with age, smelling faintly of dust and old ink. As she moves them to the box, one slides loose. A photograph, black and white going amber at the edges, corners curling inward like it too is trying to protect itself from time. She stops. It's her. 26 years old, standing in front of this same blackboard, wearing a dress she'd forgotten she owned, surrounded by 30 children who are now, she does the math slowly, in their 50s. 1986. My first class. I remember I cried the night before, terrified I wouldn't know what to do with 30 children who weren't mine, who belonged to other women, other homes, other lives I would only ever glimpse through report cards and parent conferences. Her thumb brushes the edge of the photo, tracing the outline of her own younger face, a stranger and not a stranger. I never married. There was a man once, briefly, in my 20s. Emmanuel, his name was. But the timing was wrong, and then the timing was wrong again, the way timing so often is, when you are the one holding a classroom together with both hands. Somehow 40 years had folded past me like pages I never got to read twice. I never had children of my own. She sets the photograph on top of the box, face up, and stares at it a moment too long, longer than she means to. I had this instead, or so I told myself, on the nights the loneliness felt too large for the house I'd built alone. The memories come warm and quick now, texture over plot, the shape of 40 years compressed into moments too small to be called history. And yet, young Adaeze, decades ago, kneeling beside a boy's desk, pressing a folded naira note into his hand for lunch, telling him not to mention it to the other children, her voice low, conspiratorial, kind. Adaeze staying long after the bell, the hallway emptying around her, helping a girl sound out a word, then another, then a whole sentence, the girl's face lighting when it finally clicks. A small combustion of understanding that Adaeze has learned to live for. Adaeze at a market stall, counting coins from her own thin salary, buying exercise books because a child came to school with none. Adaeze, older now, grey threading through her hair, sitting at a hospital bedside, not her own child, a student's, holding his small hand while his mother works a night shift she cannot leave. Adaeze walking a girl home in the rain because the girl's father has forgotten again, holding her own umbrella over the child's head and letting the water soak her own shoulder instead. I told myself it was simply the job, she says, that any teacher would do the same, that I was not owed any special thanks for doing what the salary, meager as it was, already paid me for. But somewhere in all those small Tuesdays, somewhere between the naira notes and the rain-soaked shoulders, I built something I didn't have a name for. I just didn't know it was being built. I thought I was only getting through the day. Evening comes and her small house is quiet in a way it has never been on a school night before. No papers to grade, no lesson to prepare, no reason to set an alarm. She makes tea for one, the kettles whistle sharp and lonely in the silence, a sound that used to mean 5 more minutes before the rush of the morning began, and now means nothing at all. Outside, her neighbor Mr. Bassi waters his garden and calls over the fence, his voice carrying easily in the still evening air. "Congratulations again on the retirement, Mrs. Okonkwo," he says. "My Emeka still talks about you, you know. Says you're the reason he finished school at all. Said you used to make him stay for extra reading when the other teachers had given up on him." She smiles, a little distant, the compliment sliding past her like water. "That's kind of you to say," she answers, and waves, and goes back inside, closing the door a little too firmly. She does not let herself believe it. Kindness, she tells herself. People say things at retirements. People say things to old women so they feel their years were not wasted. I heard it as politeness, she admits. A thing you say to an old teacher on her way out the door, the way you might compliment a meal you did not much enjoy simply to be gentle with the cook. I did not yet understand that some doors don't close when you think they do. They only open onto rooms you haven't been shown yet. She sits by the window with her tea, watching the empty streetlights flickering to life one by one, and for a moment her face carries the full weight of the question she asked in the classroom, unanswered still, growing heavier with every quiet hour. What do I have to show for it? She does not cry. She has never been a woman who cries easily. But something in her chest sits low and heavy, like a stone she has swallowed and cannot dislodge. Her phone rings, the sound startling in the silence. An unfamiliar number, a code she doesn't recognize. "Hello," she answers. "Mrs. Okonkwo," a man's voice says. "I don't know if you remember me. Chidi Okafor. You taught me in... Goodness, it must be almost 30 years ago now. I got your number from my mother. She still has it written in an old address book." Her breath catches. A name from another lifetime, arriving like a letter from someone she'd assumed long gone from her memory, though it returns to her now, whole and immediate. "Chidi, the boy who cried during every exam?" she asks, and he laughs, warm and unguarded, down the line. That's me. Every single one. You used to let me sit closer to the window because you said the air helped. I don't know if that's true or if you just felt sorry for me. She laughs too, small and surprised. A little of both, if I'm honest. I'm a doctor now, he tells her. Pediatrics, actually. I work with children who cry during checkups the way I used to cry during exams. I heard you retired, and I wanted to call, to say thank you. You used to stay after school with me, remember? When I was behind in reading and my parents didn't have the money for a tutor. She sits down slowly onto the arm of her chair, hand pressed to her chest, the stone in it loosening just slightly. I remember, she says, you could barely get through a paragraph without your hands shaking. I think about that a lot, actually, he says. How you never made me feel stupid for it. You just kept saying, again, Chidi, again, like you had all the time in the world for me, when I know now you didn't. You had 30 other children too. I just wanted you to know it mattered. All of it mattered. She thanks him, voice thick, unexpected, and sets the phone down gently when the call ends, staring at it as though it might ring again with more of what she'd never let herself expect. I told myself it was a kind gesture, she says. One good former student, remembering an old teacher out of politeness and nothing more, calling on a quiet evening because his conscience or his mother had prompted him to. I did not yet let myself hope it meant anything larger than a single kind phone call on a single quiet night. That night she lies awake, staring at the ceiling, the photograph from the classroom now propped on her nightstand where she can see it from her pillow. Here is the fear I never said out loud, not once, in 40 years of saying nearly everything else out loud to rooms full of children who couldn't possibly understand it yet, she confesses. I gave everything, my evenings, my small salary, my whole unmarried life, to children who were never truly mine, who went home each night to other mothers, other fathers, other kitchens where I did not belong and was never meant to. She turns onto her side, curling slightly, the way a much younger woman might curl against a cold night. And when I am gone, who will remember? A woman with no husband, no children, no family name to carry forward, no grandchildren to visit on Sundays. Just a room number and a box of chalk and a cracked mug that says something clever a class thought up 30 years ago. I was so certain the answer was nothing. I was so certain, lying there in the dark, that I had built a life that would not outlast me by so much as a season. She closes her eyes, and for the first time we see her not as the steady teacher of the classroom, upright and certain, but as simply a tired, aging woman, alone with a question that has waited 40 years to finally be asked in the quiet. And now that it has been asked, refuses to let her sleep. I did not know, lying there, that the answer to my question was already being assembled, patch by patch, in living rooms I had never visited, by hands I had once held steady over 100 trembling pencils. Elsewhere, a different rhythm begins, quicker, layered, hopeful, the visual texture brightening as if the story itself senses relief is coming. A phone screen glows with a message thread titled Mrs. Okonkwo's Class, All Years. The members join one by one, their names appearing with small captions of who they've become, a quiet roll call of a life's quiet impact. Chidi Okafor, pediatrician, class of 98. Ngozi Ume, lawyer, class of 91. Tunde Bello, mechanic, class of 05. Blessing Eze, mother of 3, class of 96. Captain Aminu Yusuf, Nigerian Army, class of 89. Funke Adeyemi, nurse, class of 2001. Ngozi types, she has no idea, right? Tunde replies, "None. My mother is accidentally inviting her to lunch on Saturday." Blessing sends a photo, her own daughter, 7, holding up a crayon drawing of a woman in front of a chalkboard, Mrs. Okonkwo written carefully beneath it. While I lay awake, convinced I was forgotten, something else entirely was happening, the story tells us, brighter now, warmth returning, like color returning to a faded photograph. Something I could not see because it was never meant for me to see, not yet, not until it was finished, the way you cannot see a quilt while it is still only scattered squares of fabric on a dozen different laps. Dozens of hands, now grown, now weathered by their own decades of work and worry, pull out old photographs, old report cards, old birthday cards written in careful, teacherly script. A quilting frame is set up in someone's living room, 3 women bent over it under a single bright lamp, needles moving steadily, patches of fabric taking shape beneath their hands. Captain Yusuf, in a modest apartment, carefully irons an old certificate she'd once given him for Most Improved Reader, 1989, preserving it in a plastic sleeve like something precious. Every one of them, in their own way, was doing what I had once done for them, staying up late, past when it was convenient, for someone they loved. Saturday morning, Adaeze moves slowly through her routine, the strange, aimless routine of a woman with nowhere she has to be for the first time in 4 decades, a Saturday that stretches ahead of her with nothing to fill it. Her phone buzzes. A text from Mrs. Bello, a name she vaguely places as a former colleague from the school, though the face is fuzzy in her memory now. "Adaeze, some of us old teachers are having a small lunch at the school hall today. Would love if you came. Nothing fancy, just some of us catching up before we all scatter into our retirements." I almost said no, she admits. I was tired in the particular way retirement tiredness feels. Not the good ache of a long day's work well done, the ache that lets you sleep soundly, but the hollow tiredness of a life with too much quiet in it, too many hours with nothing pressing against them. I thought of staying home with my tea and my ceiling and my unanswered question. She sits at her kitchen table a long moment, the text still glowing on her phone, undecided. But something, perhaps 40 years of habit, the simple discipline of showing up when asked, perhaps something else I couldn't name, made me put on my good dress instead. The green one, the one I wore to every graduation, the one that still fit exactly as it had 10 years ago because I had worn it so rarely otherwise. She stands before the mirror a moment, adjusting a scarf at her throat, the woman in the reflection looking older and smaller than the one who stood at that blackboard in 1986, but with the same steady eyes. "I want you to remember this moment, whoever you are, wherever you are listening from," she says, "because I almost missed it. Because how many of the good things waiting for us in this life have we almost missed simply for being too tired to put on our good dress?" She picks up her small handbag, pauses at the door, and looks back once at the quiet house, as if some part of her already senses she will return to it a different woman than the one who is leaving it now. She walks the familiar path to the school, keys jingling out of habit in her handbag, though she no longer needs them, the school gates rising ahead of her exactly as they have for 40 years, and yet different now, seen from the other side of a life's work completed. The hall door is closed, unusual for a Saturday. She pushes it open, expecting a handful of tired colleagues and cold jollof rice. Silence for one suspended second, then noise, an eruption of it. Dozens of voices. Surprise! The hall is full, not of a dozen old colleagues, but of nearly 100 former students, spanning decades, some grey-haired themselves now, their own children clutching their hands or perched on hips, banners strung across the ceiling in careful hand-painted letters reading, "Thank you MRS. Okonkwo, 40 years of showing up." She stands frozen in the doorway, hand pressed to her mouth, her handbag slipping from her fingers to the floor, unnoticed. "I have taught for 40 years, she says, her voice breaking slightly, no longer entirely composed. "I have stood in front of thousands of children across 4 decades, and I thought, arrogantly perhaps, that I understood the full range of what a classroom could hold, what a single room could contain of human feeling. I did not know a room could hold this. I did not know I could be so wrong, so happily, so completely wrong." Chidi steps forward first, older now, a stethoscope still around his neck from a shift he came straight from without even changing, his white coat still on, a small betrayal of how urgently he did not want to be late for this. "You didn't think we'd let you leave without saying goodbye properly, did you?" he says. After everything, she can't speak. She only shakes her head, tears already falling freely now. 40 years of careful composure finally, gratefully giving way. One by one, they come forward, a slow procession of a life she did not know she'd built. Not vague tributes, not the polite fog of "you were a good teacher," but specific memories, spoken plainly, the kind of detail only truth carries. Mosey, now a lawyer, composed but her voice wavering, goes first. "You bought me my first pair of school shoes. Do you remember? Mine had a hole straight through the sole. You handed me a new pair the next week, told me your cousin had ordered the wrong size. I found the receipt years later, folded in one of my old books. I still have it." She holds up a small, faded receipt, and Adaeze covers her mouth harder. Tunde is next, broad-shouldered now, oil still faintly staining his knuckles. "You taught me that failing a test wasn't the same as failing at life," he says. "I failed maths 4 times that year, and every time you sat with me after and said, 'Again, Tunde, again.' I think about that every time something breaks in my shop and I have to start over. I own 3 shops now." Blessing steps forward holding her daughter's hand, the same little girl from the drawing. "This is Ada," she says. "I named her after you, after Adaeze. I never told you, but I will tell you now." She doesn't know it yet, not fully, but she will. She'll grow up knowing there was a woman who mattered enough to name a child for. The little girl looks up shyly and offers Adaeze the crayon drawing, the chalkboard woman rendered in careful, loving color. Captain Yusuf, in uniform, steps forward and salutes her crisply, an old joke between them from a school assembly decades ago, when he'd once saluted her in front of the whole school as a dare. And the room laughs through its tears, the tension breaking into something lighter. "Still the only person who ever made me stand up straight without shouting at me for it," he says. Funke, in her nurse's cardigan, reads aloud a short, clumsy poem Adaeze had once written in her yearbook. Words about courage and quiet strength that a 13-year-old couldn't have understood then, but has clearly carried for decades since. I realized, standing there, surrounded by the whole scattered harvest of 40 years, that I had made a mistake in my counting, she reflects. I had counted years and salaries and an empty house and a phone that rarely rang, and I had called the sum of it nothing. But there is another kind of arithmetic, one I had never learned, though I had been practicing it my entire working life without knowing its name. One where 100 small kindnesses, given without any expectation of return, do not simply vanish into the air the moment they're given. They go somewhere you cannot see, and they wait there, patiently, gathering, until the day they come home to you all at once. She is guided to a chair at the center of the room and sits, surrounded, as more and more step forward, generations of them, the shy ones and the loud ones, and the ones who cried during every exam, and the ones who never cried at all but remembered anyway. Each one a small, living proof against the stone she'd carried in her chest for so many quiet nights. Chidi and Blessing step forward last, carrying something folded carefully between them, a large quilt, patchworked from dozens of different fabrics, clearly stitched by many different hands over many different nights, some patches neater than others, some slightly crooked, all of it somehow more beautiful for the unevenness. "Each patch is from one of us, Mrs. Okonkwo," Blessing says. "We wanted you to have something no one person could have made alone, something that took all of us together the way it took all of us together to become who we are, like you did for all of us, one at a time, for 40 years. They unfold it and drape it gently over her shoulders. Up close, each patch is embroidered with a small symbol, a book, a pair of shoes, a stethoscope, a soldier's star, a nurse's cap, a lecturer's cap and gown, a child's crayon drawing stitched in careful thread, each one a private memory only that student and Adaeze would fully understand, a whole secret language of gratitude spelled out in fabric and thread. She wraps the quilt tighter around herself, the way a mother wraps a blanket around a child on a cold night, tucking the edges in. Except here, in this room, in this moment, the child is her, and the mothering has come back around, full circle, from the 100 children she raised across 40 years, without ever once calling it that, without ever letting herself believe it counted as family in the way family was supposed to count. "I used to think family was something you were given, a husband, children of your own blood, a name passed down through generations," she says, the words coming slower now, weighted with everything that came before. "I know now it is also something you build, one small Tuesday at a time, one naira note pressed into a small hand, one rain-soaked walk home, without ever being sure any of it is building anything at all. I did not have children. I had 30 of them, then 30 more, then 30 more again, every single year for 40 years. And on the day I finally stopped counting, on the day I finally let myself believe the answer was nothing, they came back, all at once, to remind me exactly what all that counting had made. The hall is full of warmth and light and the low hum of 100 conversations, Adaeze at its center wrapped in her quilt of patches, surrounded by every version of the family she never knew, until this very afternoon that she had been quietly raising all along. "I never had children of my own," she says, softer than everything that came before it. "I had all of them, and in the end, in this room, on this ordinary Saturday, I almost didn't attend. That was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything." If this story reminded you that family is something we build, not just something we're given, tell me in the comments who your Mrs. Okonkwo was. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. There's always another waiting.